in a perfected manner next to reality. That means to say that just as the person who jumps up and down and says, we want Mashiach now, represents a certain extreme within one group, and the person who attacks an army base in the name of protecting settlements represents an extreme, the person who believes that buses should be segregated, what they all represent is a disappointment with the ultimate compromise which the state of Israel is. Now, that compromise is a name in Hebrew. It's called HaKonsensus HaLe'umi, the national consensus. Now, if you're in the national consensus, which is true about almost everybody in Israel, what that means is you know how it works. It works. I press for as much money for what I want. I press for as many school buildings for my group. I press all the way to the very end of what I can press. They do much more than we do. They're much more extreme than us. But when it comes to being able to, I live my way and they live their way, that's when I stop. So for example, if I think that I'm going to go up and nail mezuzahs on the doors of the people who don't want them, all 25 Israelis don't want, Jewish Israelis don't want mezuzahs, and if they don't like it, I'm going to kick them out of the country, I know I can't do that. I can come but demonstrate in front of their house and say, why don't you have a mezuzah? You see the point I'm making? They all know where the boundary is. The groups we're talking about don't accept that boundary. That's the first thing that's very important to understand. The second thing that's very important to understand is that the disappointment with the reality itself is based in the fanaticism we spoke about before. Because the fanatic, now go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls group, the fanatic hates everyone outside his group. He believes everyone else is destroying the society. He blames the other people. And for him, it creates a religious crisis. Because another important thing about the fanatic, it's not enough to satisfy my religious needs. You have to do what I want. Otherwise, it's unsatisfactory. So what happens is that what these people do is they go beyond the normal, I'll say even Israeli ways, of trying to press for getting what you want. Because it's very different than the way it's done here. And when they got to the point where you can't get any further, everybody else says, okay, I did my mitzvah, now we go ahead. But that's not what they do. They say, I did my mitzvah, it didn't get me yet what I have to get, so I'll go on the bus anyhow and tell the woman to get off, or to go in the back, or she can't wear these clothes, or whatever. The fact that that action is an illegal action, or maybe even an anti-halachic action, doesn't matter to this kind of person, because he's coming with the mentality that is a kind of a crisis, that the land of Israel requires a kosher state of Israel, which is exactly back to the form of the Satmar, who said they don't accept the state of Israel because it's not a perfect halakhic society, along with the fact that the Mashiach hasn't come. And therefore what happens is that instead of saying, I have to withdraw from this because it's not for me, like the Neturei Karta don't take money from the government, it's not right, I want to do my own thing, what they do is they've mixed two things together. They've mixed their own unwillingness to live in this society with a desire to change the society because of the assumption that there is a missed goal of the perfect Jewish state, which is the goal that they really have and what they really wanted to achieve. And I would say that this is exactly the reason for the crisis that we see today in Israel, because you have to be willing to accept that the expectation of the Jewish state, the perfect Jewish state, which would be religiously a perfect Jewish state, can't be and won't be achieved. Both because everybody is not religious and for other reasons that we have to face. And so therefore what happens is that these people are in a constant state of tension. Now who they actually are, they represent a group which is so far off the scale to the right. But to the right, depending on who they are, either nationalistically, like the guys that went into the army base who are, quote, national religious, which people mistakenly believe is the same as being modern Orthodox, another lecture for another time, and also crazies of the Neturei Karta variety who've associated with themselves other discontents who are doing these things because they can't face the reality of compromise, which for us as Americans is very easy, but remember they come from a culture which is not a culture of compromise. Now we have to address some very specific issues, so I don't want to keep you here too long, some very specific issues about Israeli religious life that will at least tell you a little bit. You have to understand that according to these people, that is to say these fanatics, there should be a total separation between the fanatic group and the rest of the society. What always happens with fanatics is that when the problem that they want solved begins to be solved, then they actually become more violent because that's not what they want. This is the case with the Palestinians. You see it all the time, that whenever there are moves towards peace, the Palestinians become more violent. It's going on right now in the news right now. So how does this work? So let's get back for a moment to some of the Israel issues. So first of all, there's the ongoing army issue. Of course, you know that non-Orthodox, in quotes, Jews can't stand the fact that a lot of these guys are taking army deferments. However, right, you also have the fact that there are increasing numbers of, quote, right-wing Jews entering the army, which means that if you're an extremist, you not only see that they're getting closer to saying you have to go to the army, but worse, you're watching your fellow extremists, in your view, defect. Because when somebody who looks like you and looks like an extremist joins the army, it's a defection for you. So in other words, while what we look at as the amelioration of a problem by bringing more of these so-called Haredim into the army is looked by them as their group is eroding. Now, this is the case also with attempts to bring secular education and jobs to the community. So as more so-called Haredim get education and get jobs, the extreme gets more extreme because they're fighting all of these developments. Of course, there are big economic aspects here. Although I can't believe anybody can be crazy enough to believe that you're going to increase the support for the ultra-Orthodox Jews by doing some of these actions. But nonetheless, there is something called Kitzbat Yeladim. Kitzbat Yeladim is the giving of money to everybody according to the number of children that they have from the government. This has been radically cut. And also, you have the problem